Welcome to Driven. I'm your host, Paul Vitrano. We're going to learn and talk about AI, robotics, autonomous vehicles, and so much more. Check us out at driven.show on the web and give us a thumbs up or subscribe here if you like the show. So kick back or buckle up and become driven. All right, Paul Vitrano, great to connect here. And I just want to relay a quick anecdote. I think it was the summer of 2019 when we first took a Polaris gem. Now it's a Waev gem. We'll talk about that. And converted it into an automated, fully autonomous vehicle. And it operated around this community. It was the first autonomous vehicle in Virginia. And people just raved about the vehicle. They're like, can we buy these vehicles? Like, I want to drive this thing around. And we're like, well, yeah, you can. And here's where you go to find that out. So anyway, thank you for joining us. You are the SVP, Head of International Business Development and Chief Legal Policy Officer at Waev. And anyway, welcome to the Driven Podcast, and thanks for taking the time to talk to me today.
Pleasure to be here, Paul. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, me too. So you're a co-founder as well, right? Of this entity Waev. Maybe I don't know if you could take us like on a little journey of this vehicle, this gem, which is just a perfect name because it is a gem of a vehicle that has had just a long history and sort of where it came from and how it got to Waev, I guess.
Sure. A little history here, and there is a pretty rich history to GEM. What became GEM started in the mid to late 90s when a couple of former GM engineers went about creating a small electric vehicle that they dubbed at the time a neighborhood electric vehicle, an NEV, as it's been adopted in some places since, to provide an alternative to a full-size vehicle for transport around local environments, something more robust than a golf cart, but short of a full-size vehicle. And they were successful in developing prototypes and working to bring a vehicle to market. It was called back then the Trans 2, and one of the inventors, if you will, a guy named Dan Sturgis, actually wrote a book called Near to Far, and it's more about mobility systems and a vision for the future. But he takes the opportunity to talk about the early history of GEM and their invention. So it was interesting to see that as now a co-owner of the brand and to learn that history. I read the book not too long ago. In any event, they were looking to bring the vehicle to market and eventually sold it to Chrysler Corporation. And so from the late 90s until 2011, it was owned by Chrysler Corporation, and they brought it to market under the GEM brand. It was called Global Electric Motor Cars originally, shortened to GEM. They produced it out of North Dakota and had a pretty good run with what we now call the classic version of GEM, a different body style, different platform. And it was at a time when EV tax credits were new and offsetting, internal combustion production, and there were crazy incentives that were being offered at the time, and Chrysler had a nice run with GEM, taking advantage of those. And then things evolved. EVs became more mainstream, if you will, even in those early days, and those credits went away. And we haven't had them since. So all the business from GEM in the last decade or so have been unsubsidized, which is kind of a testament to the value of the product that they've been able to survive and thrive without them, unlike full-size EVs. In any event, in 2021, Polaris Industries acquired the brand from Chrysler, and Polaris is a Fortune 500 power sports, global power sports leader. And at the time, their CEO was looking to develop a commercial product line. And GEM then and through today is primarily used for commercial, government, industrial uses, not consumers, even though it's a very consumer-friendly vehicle. And so GEM was going to be part of a new vertical, if you will, in Polaris, focused on commercial customers, and it carried on the Chrysler designs for a few years, and then
Now that was, sorry to interrupt, but that wasn't what year Polaris bought that in
2011.
2001? 2011.
2011,
Okay. Gotcha.
yes.
Okay.
And so they carried those designs forward for a couple years, and not long thereafter embarked on a product development process to provide or to bring to market a brand new GEM. And that they're quite large projects inside of Polaris as an engineering company. And so that new vehicle type or vehicle platform brought to market as Model Year 16. And so from Model Year 16 forward, there's been a different looking, a more modern looking body style, and again, entirely new platform of GEM that has been carried forward, at least in appearance, to this day. Polaris held GEM until 2021 when they had a CEO change, and the former CEO that was building this commercial business moved on, and the new CEO sort of had a mandate to focus on core power sports. So Polaris went about a process of divesting several businesses that were not part of core power sports, and GEM and Taylor Dunn, another business, were sort of first in line to go through that process. The reason why they were together is because Taylor Dunn's a line of industrial electric vehicles that I'm sure we'll talk about, that had its own factory in Anaheim, California, and in 2017 Polaris moved production of GEM to Anaheim to create an electric vehicle center of excellence. So those two businesses were largely integrated in the same factory through the same sales channel, and were part of a Polaris commercial division that also included one of the off-road vehicles. So they were already together, sort of in a self-contained way. So Polaris brought those two brands or businesses to market together. Went through an entire process in 2021 and got to the end of it with some offers on the table. But for a variety of reasons, there was an opportunity to do something different with the businesses. And so the person who was running them inside of Polaris, Keith Simon, who was going to be going with the businesses wherever they ended up, talked to a few of us and approached Polaris about a potential management buyout. And again, for a variety of reasons, Polaris was interested in that. They wanted the businesses to continue. There was a long legacy that they were respectful of. They were looking out for the employees, and frankly, some of these, firms that were interested in buying it had a reputation of sort of slashing and burning the acquisitions and really skinning them down to a condition where you wouldn't recognize them. And Polaris didn't want that. They also wanted the management team to be able to have some success with these brands in a way that they never realized inside of Polaris, because they were really never a good fit. And so after some discussion, Polaris was open to it. Keith formed a management team, invited four of us to join him, and in late October of 21, we signed a term sheet and spent the last 2 months of 2021 working with Polaris to put the deal together and structure it in a way that would make it possible. And Polaris, to its credit, did that because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to do that just as individuals, given the magnitude of the business. And we reached terms, and on December 31st at 3:45 p.m. Eastern, we closed the deal and we reopened the doors as Waev on January 1st, 2022, and essentially carried these businesses forward without skipping a beat.
Wow. Wow. So yeah, this gem has 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 persisted and had many histories in many different companies, or a couple different companies, and here it is at Waev, and it's amazing. Has it always been has it always been sort of like this, classified as an LSV, a low speed vehicle, or what was it? Which I guess for people who don't know, there's an FMVSS, Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard, that speaks to low speed vehicles traveling, what is it, 25 miles an hour or less, and
Yes.
but it can operate in the U.S. in 35-mile an hour or lower speed zones, I guess, right?
Sure, sure. I could tell you a little bit more about the LSV and the history there. When GEM was, or Trans 2 was invented, the LSV class hadn't even been created yet. And I wasn't there, but I believe that the creation of GEM was largely responsible for NHTSA creating FMVSS 500, which was adopted in 1998, so early days of GEM at Chrysler. And so it's been an LSV ever since. And as you said, that's a part of the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards that's dedicated to the equipment and performance requirements for this special class of vehicles. It's the only street legal class of four-wheel vehicle that does not need to comply with the full set of FMVSS, most notably crash testing, ABS, things, more modern developments in full-size automobiles and light trucks. This was purpose-built for these low-speed environments. So, as you said, top speed of 25 miles per hour, and there's probably about a dozen of the FMVSS that are applicable to this class. Things like lighting, signals, seat belts, and then more modern things like rear view cameras and audio emitters to allow it to be heard, that apply. But other than that, it's pretty free to let the manufacturers, voluntarily add additional features, and we as GEM have a whole lot of features that we've added just because we think they're the right thing to do and to enhance safety and comfort of the customers. So that class has been in existence since 1998. GEM's always operated within that classification. The use is governed, by the states, and so just last year we succeeded in adding Connecticut as the 50th state, plus the District of Columbia, to have a statewide LSV law. So some states handle it a little bit differently, but you were right on in that the predominant regulatory framework is that low-speed vehicles can be operated on roads 35 and under, and even though the vehicle has a top speed of 25 miles an hour. GEM is used in the U.S. and Canada, where it's also street legal, and around the world in non-road environments as well because of its size, and that's a popular use case. But it is a street legal motor vehicle in those two countries.
Yeah, yeah, and it's. I think I've seen. I mean, I've seen maybe there are aftermarket modifications that you don't like to hear about, but I think I've seen people be like kind of make them go faster too, right? Or is the electric motor inside of it inherently? I mean, it must be overpowered in some sense, right? Or is because it seems like a pretty capable motor. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the motor and the batteries and or what
Yeah,
you can speak of that.
sure. So let me just take on the sort of the tampering issue. We go to significant lengths through gearing, the motor controller, the size of the tires, and whatnot to prevent tampering
Yeah.
to the extent reasonably possible. That's really important because we have this classification that we need to honor, and GEM doesn't exist without it. And so we're very vigilant about preventing, to the extent we can, tampering. We require our dealers to, agree to abide by the law and regulations and not do that. But in the past, in particular, there have been overhauls of gems where the internals are ripped out and something else is put in there to allow it to go faster. It's a bad idea, but
Yeah.
it has happened in the past. With respect to how gems, sort of constructed, if you will, from a motor and battery standpoint, we use one of two motors, a 5 kilowatt or a 6.5 kilowatt, depending on the model, and the latter is an upgrade for the smaller models. And in 2020, for model year 2024, we as Waev did a major revision to the electrical architecture of the vehicle. We had been operating, carrying forward the Polaris design, which was very sound, but had some features that were unique to Polaris. Because, just think about the context that, they make hundreds of thousands of off-road vehicles every year. They have a huge supply chain that they leverage. And so a lot of Polaris Ranger and Razor, components ended up finding their way into GEM. It just added some complexity. There was some components from Bosch that were somewhat proprietary. There was a DC-DC converter that added complexity. And so we took the opportunity as Waev and kept the platform and the appearance the same, but really redid the electrical architecture, simplified it, incorporated more off-the-shelf components, brought brand new proprietary custom designed lithium ion packs to market, and really redid all of that under the hood type material to make it much more easy to service and much more integrated into the GEM platform.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess I know there's a couple battery pack options, right? Like, because the sort of maybe the standard model has I guess it's a 48 volt kind of battery pack in the back, and then there's a lithium version too. Maybe like what are the ranges of power that you can get in that sort of modular battery configuration, I guess?
Sure. So we have four battery options. The standard are maintenance-free lead acid or AGM batteries. There's a standard size that comes as stock equipment with the E2 and the E4, the two-seater and the four-seater. The standard option for the E6 and the ELXD pickup truck is a distance version of that AGM battery, so a little larger, which is also available as an option on the smaller models. And then we have two lithium ion packs, which are coupled with fast chargers. We have an 8 kilowatt pack with a 2.2 kilowatt fast charger, and then a 16 kilowatt pack with a 4.4 kilowatt fast charger. And as there's a lot of advantages to lithium ion when it comes to operating range, size, the ability to opportunity charge, which is, charge it for short periods of time before it goes through a full charge cycle without damaging the battery. The warranty is much more robust, and it just provides, a longer life and a better performance for those who need it, particularly in commercial, government, industrial settings. And what's nice about the way our packs were designed, because we work closely with our supplier partner, and really it's a GEM owned design, we have the ability to have the same type of pack in expanded. So we could eventually do a 20 kilowatt or 24 kilowatt pack if our customer demanded it.
I see. And that's relatively new, right? This sort of custom battery, because when it was under the Polaris brand, it didn't have that, right? Is that correct?
That's right. This was part of model year 24, so we
Okay.
just started building vehicles with the new packs about a year ago. And prior to that, it was a supplied solution through Polaris that has since been discontinued.
And yeah, and I imagine, so does that address like any supply chain concerns? Because, with different situations, batteries and what have you can be hard, lithium batteries can be, short supply in some cases, I guess.
Yes. In fact, one of the reasons why we decided to develop these batteries that we're using now was because the incumbent supplier had ceased making the batteries, the lithium ion
Mm.
packs that we were using. It was a small company that was then acquired by Cummins. So it was sort of in the Cummins umbrella, but it was a very niche business and they decided to exit it. And so we needed to find an alternative supplier anyway, so we took the opportunity to do our own thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's fantastic. So what kind of range are you getting these days on these E6s and 2s and 4s with those packs? It must be pretty beefy.
Yeah, so with the max lithium ion pack, we'll go for the E2 upwards of 110 miles. For the E6, which is the heaviest of the vehicles, it's going to be more around the 75-mile range, maybe more, just depending on a variety of conditions. But really good range. Again, with opportunity charging, you can get well over 100 miles if you're taking breaks and things like that. And so there are very few use cases that will require more mileage than that for a gem.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, yeah, because it's a different application than a Tesla or something that's going to travel at a higher speed at some, distance or whatever. For this platform, that's easy to. I mean, I don't know if you could travel that many miles in an 8 hour day, so it's a service day for a lot of applications.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
this is obviously a different use case, but I lived not too long ago in Washington D.C. in the city, and so I had a gem there, and as an owner of the company and an enthusiast, if you will, I drove that all over D.C., which is perfect environment for gem because all the roads are low speed, default speed limits 20 miles an hour, and so you can really get anywhere, not only in the district but into Northern Virginia and suburban Maryland. And I would go out and drive as long as I could, and I had the small AGM pack, so it only got 30 miles of
mm,
range, and I couldn't run it out really. I mean, there's only
yeah.
so far you can go in a low speed, which by definition are short distances and things like that. So when you talk about 75 to 100 plus miles of range, it's more than you really could ever need.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. So the and now I guess one of the things that it didn't have that it now has too, which I'm sure is a power consumer, but an important piece is air conditioning, right?
Yes, we just
I know
announced.
yeah, it had a heater. I remember the heater, but the air conditioning was always a question in certain hotter climates.
Yeah, in fact, just this week we publicly announced the full HVAC package. As you mentioned, we've had heat for a while, full hard doors, which is a real distinguishing factor
Hmm.
for GEM, a defroster, a fan, but not AC. And we've had a lot of requests for it over the years. So we just brought it to market. We have a roof-mounted unit. We partnered with a company named Dometic, which is
Oh
big
yeah.
in RV and truck AC systems that are integrated into those vehicles, and it'll be a factory installed option as part of that HVAC package and fully integrated. And it's quite impressive. We've been doing a lot of testing of it, and we deployed a demo unit with an end customer in Houston who does this microtransit shuttling type business. And the driver was saying they were too cold. I mean, it was kicking out that much cool temperature in the 90 plus Houston weather. So we're really excited about it.
That's awesome. And so does that is it so it's a power draw though, right? Like does it is it significantly, like, I don't know, does it take 20% of the charge, 10%, do you know, or
Yeah, It depends. We're estimating it's about 4% per hour if it's run,
Okay.
for the full hour. So you can go, 5 hours and still only lose 20%. And, again, if you don't have to have the max lithium ion, but if you do, you just do the math, you still can get quite a distance,
Yeah.
even if you're running it full time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. I remember, yeah, we had tried some other, solutions back in the day when we ran the pilot in Virginia. And and I'll never forget that the one engineer built like this system where he had like this portable air conditioner in the back trunk, and he ran what looked like a Franklin stovepipe through the vehicle. And I was just like, this is not a good solution for us. So we put some fans in, and seat coolers with like the things that you put on
Sure.
the seats to, but the air conditioning is an awesome add, and that's going to be a huge, because you must have a lot of customers down in Florida, because I see the vehicles down there. I see them at Sea Island when I go to visit the resort there, and of course in Key West and places like that, you see them all over the place.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, all the warm climates in the U.S. you mentioned, Texas, California, Arizona, all have interest in those. In fact, we received our first order from a dealer and a customer in Tampa. They're the first purchasers of the HVAC units. But as you noted at the beginning, part of my responsibilities with the company is looking after our international business. So just imagine all those markets,
Yeah.
Mexico, the Caribbean, the Middle East. All those markets have requested AC in the past, and I think are going to be big consumers of the package.
Interesting. So you have distributors over in overseas in what countries, I guess, at this point?
Yeah, so I should know off the top of my head, but I don't. We're in dozens of countries around the world. Specifically for GEM, we have several dealers in Mexico. We have a few who service all of the Caribbean. We have dealers in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and can reach into all of the GCC there. We have Australia is a dealer who carries GEM throughout Canada, carries GEM. And then
Hmm.
for our Taylor Dunn line, we have even more reach. So to the extent we have GEM opportunities that pop up in a region that really we don't sell GEM into, we have the ability to leverage those partners to satisfy those
Gotcha.
customer needs as well.
And are these, so I know it's got the FMVSS uh, certification, or whatever you might call it, here in the US. In Europe, I know one of the groups we were talking to said it was homologated, as their term, for operation on public roads in Europe as well. Is that do I have that right?
You're remembering it correctly, but in actuality, GEM used to be homologated under the applicable EU regulations for road use. Years back, as those regulations evolved and added additional requirements beyond FMVSS 500, Polaris decided that the investment in making those changes weren't justified by the market opportunity at the time, and so it ceased being homologated for road use. Since Waev, we've taken the step to have it CE certified under the machinery directive for non-road use, so it can be operated off the road just like a golf cart or other types of vehicles anywhere in the EU. And we've had some discussions about potentially getting on-road homologation again, which has to make its way up the priority list for us. We're still a pretty lean
Sure.
company as Waev, and so we try to focus on putting resources into the best opportunities. And at this point, we haven't decided to pursue that, but we likely will in the not too distant future.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, and actually back to sort of the warm weather operations. I guess I imagine in Florida, do most of the do you know most of the customers operate them with the doors on or off? Because I guess pre air conditioned version, they might have just used them with the doors off. I guess what's the trend there?
Yeah, for sure. Consumers generally operate them without with the doors off, if they even order doors at all. You know, the doors are removable, just like a Jeep,
Hmm.
and so I always tell people, get the doors and just take them off. This way you have it for bad weather, or if it gets cold, even in
Yeah.
warm climates. But I'd say generally consumers operate them without doors. Any kind of commercial use has doors just from a safety standpoint. So all those microtransit operators that are prevalent in Florida and all around the country have the doors. Commercial and government users tend to have the doors again from a safety standpoint.
Yeah. And for people who don't know, I guess, like, I know there's different door types, but it is these, even the hard doors are just super easy. You just pop them right off. It's not like a complicated process. You open the
Yeah, that's
door and you
right.
slide it off, and yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it's
like a
two
five.
pins that's two
Yeah.
pins that sit where the hinge would be. They're not permanently affixed, so quite easy to get them on and off, which really makes it versatile, as I was mentioning.
Yeah. And so kind of like going to the automation aspect of this, you know, we I'd always been interested in the Gem as just because I thought it was a cool looking vehicle, and I wanted one personally anyway. But but back in back in 2018, the Albemarle County, Virginia, wanted to do something with us to demonstrate what autonomous operations could look like. And again, this was a first for the state of Virginia, maybe elsewhere. But we took a gem and outfitted it with this AV kit technology. And for I think it was during the summer months of 2019, I believe. We operated it in and around like this town called Crozet, Virginia, and then from the downtown to a community there. And what was really cool about this demonstration was because of the speeds and and sort of the geofence nature of it. Even though they had a safety operator on board, because you had kids and all that getting on the vehicle too, and sometimes people brought dogs on, and in these communities, and and we there was zero interventions during this operation, and it was it was a smooth ride. It was it and so that really was an accelerator for us into transit in general, right? Because prior to that we had been working with mining trucks, and we'd worked with some auto manufacturers and what have you. So it was a great sort of, I guess, micro transit, you might call it, or I don't know what someone might call it, application, that really demonstrated, I think, a safe um, a safe application of autonomy, and from my perspective, because you could do it with this smaller, more um, uh, I don't know, just like a safer looking and safer feeling platform that people felt comfortable with versus sort of larger cars and vans bombing through communities, right? So
Oh,
it was great.
oh, great! And as you know, I had the opportunity to visit with you not too long ago and ride in sort of a next generation version of your technology in a gem, and I was super impressed by how it performed in the campus type environment we were riding around in, which is really the perfect application, I think, not only for gem in a manned operation, but for an autonomous operation. The low speeds not only give people comfort, but I think really make the deployment of autonomy easier to get your head around easier to get approved, just because you don't have as many risks associated with those high-speed, full-size vehicles. And the other thing that a platform like GEM provides for an autonomous deployment is the ability to potentially have it operated on a segregated lane. So, that just adds another
Right.
measure of safety, takes some variables out of it. Yeah, obviously I'm self-interested, but I think autonomy on a vehicle like GEM is really an opportunity for success and a way to accelerate automation in transportation, uh, you know, at another level beyond what's even feasible when you're operating on dual use, multi-use public roads.
Yeah, and I see it with with larger transit vehicles, which we've worked with. You're still always going to want to have, in some cases, like for a bus or even a transit van that with ADA compliance or what have you, somebody there because you have to help people get on and off in some cases in these transit applications. Someone might have a medical, you've got a 40-foot bus, you have a medical condition, or there's just many reasons for, I think, those transit agencies to still have somebody on board, even if they're not driving all the time, or it's an ADAS system or what have you. um in this vehicle, just sort of thinking ahead, in this vehicle platform and form factor, like applications like vehicle valet become possible, where you're at a resort and you can hail a vehicle maybe in an automated fashion to you, and then they can get in it. They just, the doors, with or without doors, get in the vehicle and then drive it to wherever they want to go, leave it there, and then it autonomously drives somewhere else. That's what I think of as like a, hey, here's what the technology could do. But sometimes technology guys aren't always thinking of what the customers really want. And to be, because you're thinking about what's possible, right? But is that a is but obviously I've been to resorts, so I kind of am a customer too. But do what are some of the realistic applications, and what are some of the, just like, um not like, I guess you might say, applications that people think of for autonomy that just really aren't realistic for, not just the GEM platform, but maybe other platforms that you work with?
Yeah, I think the example that you provided would be really neat. I don't know that customers would, you know, be willing to pay for that particular use case. I mean, if you've invested in autonomy, I would think that most people would just as soon have it be operated autonomously rather than hail it and then drive it. But that's just my
Right.
thought. But sort of some of the key use cases involve shuttling. Whether it be in that microtransit type environment like you were describing with the pilot, and that exists in a manned fashion all over the U.S., or in parking lot shuttles. That's a use case that frequently comes to mind. I know you've done some experimentation with that as well. It's a natural, resorts, transportation of people around large areas. I was Christmas vacation down in a resort in Jamaica, and they had four GEMs, E6s, that they would just take people back and forth along this long resort. Well, they had drivers, but just as easily could have been autonomous and accomplish the same thing. So, moving people, I think, is you know, in a shuttle type environment is really the best use case. When it comes to our other products, there's lots of other use cases that could be really interesting. One of our brands is Tiger, which is a line of tow tractors primarily used for airport ground support applications, towing baggage carts and cargo carts.
Right.
And you can just imagine, the airfield being automated, and our Tigers, being deployed plane side with a couple baggage carts behind them and having them loaded, and then just autonomously go to the baggage return area. I think we're quite a ways away from that coming to reality because of all the safety associated with airfields and the expensive planes and desire, to protect goods and people. But, once the technology develops further and there's a little more comfort around it, that would be a natural use case for autonomy on one of our vehicle types.
So do you think, like, just for that application for a moment, like, getting comfort with the safety of it, to me it seems, I mean, I don't know, it seems like there needs to be a certification or a verification and validation of with some, independent group. Obviously there's expense involved with that, but is that's what's needed for these airport agencies to kind of, or airport, you know, authorities and folks who are running these services? Is that what they need to kind of like get comfortable with that, like some sort of certification?
I think that would go a long way to easing adoption. But there's a lot of work that needs to go in behind that. I mean, to my knowledge, it hasn't even been tested for that use case. So there'd be a lot of work there. And really, for me, a prerequisite is to get those types of applications to convert to electric, because so many of them are still using gasoline, LPG, outside the U.S. diesel. In fact, to make that point, our Tiger line is the only vehicle type that we make a non-electric version, because those airport operators are slow to convert to electric. They're on the journey, but there's lots of infrastructure issues that come into play, and so I think the first step is to get those end customers to fully buy into electric power, and then hopefully not too long thereafter begin experimenting with the technology to try to see if this can be proven out.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess what do you see as sort of the the beyond just sort of comfort? Are there any other sort of like challenges that you see with operating these in and around airports? Like, you say safety, but do they have to go indoors as well as outdoors? And it's like a mixed mode of operation.
It varies on the operation, but yes, in some cases the tractors will actually drive into a building to have the luggage loaded onto the belts that would take it out to baggage claim. The cargo side tends to be a little less complicated from what I can tell, just because you're not dealing with people or little bags. They're like big operations that come moving goods, all back of house, if you will. So there are some factors. I mean, I think the confidence in the technology and its deployment from a property damage standpoint, I think is huge, because plane damage is very costly. So that's sort of the other side of safety, safety of equipment. They're all factors that have to go in there. But if you just take a step back and look at what's possible and how it matches with what we think can be accomplished, it's a perfect use case, because it's generally a controlled environment. There's not a lot of people around there. The vehicles are essentially taking the same route over and over again, all of which I think lends itself to autonomy.
Oh yeah, I mean, technology wise, 100% doable. It's just, I think it's the certification that'll, and I'm thinking just broadly across autonomy, companies and approaches. Certification becomes a problem for some groups that are using like neural networks and things like that are not, those aren't necessarily, you can't predict what they're always going to do, right? It's not there's not an easy path to certification, but there are other methods to bring to the table, I think, to make it certifiable. So to me, that seems like the technological, it's not a barrier, but it's definitely something that needs to be addressed, because functionally what you're talking about, um, is doable, and it should bring more safety to operations in many regards, because these things aren't going to collide with planes and other vehicles and what have you. So, and because of the environment, it's not nearly as busy as like an urban, environment. Although there are people and planes and equipment, but they generally still have like lanes to operate on too, right? In some cases, many cases, right? Like paths in
Yes.
which they should stay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there are designated routes for these vehicles, for all vehicles on the tarmac, just
yeah.
to maintain safety and margins and things like that. So yeah, again, it is in some ways a perfect environment for it if you can overcome the hesitancy.
And what about sort of on the other side of the airport? Like, well, let me just back up. When you've experienced the people mover ride at Disney, and and Walt Disney's vision for Epcot, and these having these people movers that would just kind of move people around, but obviously an uncoupled or a trackless people mover, where you have pod like vehicles, which could very much be like gems, or be gems, operating in sort of like just, a circuit, not a circular, but along a fixed route from like the parking lot to the airport, and then back out to the parking lot. People who are parking in long term parking, like just like a constant sort of pod-like structure of vehicles like that would be a great application in my mind. Now, I haven't thought through the economics of it all, but and then you could have these vehicles where they're traveling in a gem here, and then there's another gem with their luggage, and then the gem goes off and takes their luggage to one location, and then the people are just taken right up to the terminal, and it's just all of that can be done in a very controlled fashion. So technology wise, that's all doable today, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on business wise, or airport logistics wise, what the impediments might be to such a thing.
I think I agree that it's a really interesting use case. I think it's could be even enhanced by some follow me technology. So you have a train of gems in that
Mm-hmm.
instance that would go to a parking lot and then have the ability to peel off depending on where the passengers are parked and then reassemble to sort of redo the train. Could be really interesting. As far as impediments are concerned, in addition to, who's willing to make that investment, who is open to doing something different like that, the airport infrastructure could be a challenge because even though, you know, it's largely posted in slow speeds, with the way that these airports are sprawling, you often end up having to go on higher speed roads to get to these parking lots or the rental car areas and things like that. And even on the lower speed posted roads, people left to their nature would speed and are not always the most attentive. So I could see there being a need to solve for that so that
Mm-hmm.
everyone's safe and there's not user conflict, if you will, going from point A to point B. But for other airports, particularly those that are not as large, you don't have that challenge, and that's something that probably could be deployed quite easily.
Yeah, and certainly, I guess amusement parks and resorts too, a similar situation where you've got remote parking and then a place to get to. If you're waiting for like a single, you know, tram to come along every so often, or bus, to just have like sort of this constant stream of vehicles that could be sort of floating by, and be you could hop on and hop off, I think would certainly you know make it a much more pleasant experience. But yeah, I can see the maybe some of the impediments at airports where they've got the existing infrastructure and high speed roads that they've got to intertwine with. um, Interesting, interesting. Again, they'll all everyone will want to, and should want to, understand the safety of this, and that's where I think the certification comes into play. But it's easier to certify in a controlled environment, right, where you can
Sure.
define where the and in some cases at resorts, you could imagine they could, because they have tram, existing paths for trams and what have you anyway. Those could easily be the same paths on which these um, you know packetized little you know gems could be running and operating in a more flexible fashion for picking people up. But
Absolutely.
I guess I don't know if it comes up much, but it seems like an interesting application. And as someone who travels through airports and someone who goes to resorts, you think about these things when you're sitting there sweating in the parking lot waiting for something to pick you up.
Indeed, indeed.
Um, well, that's cool. So the in addition to I guess there's the Taylor Dunn utility vehicles, and then there's the Tiger platform as well, right? Or those are two separate brands. What's
Yeah.
the difference there? I guess.
Yeah, so the quick backstory is, Tiger was a line of airport ground support equipment. So it was tow tractors, but also back in the day, belt loaders and other things used on the tarmac. It was a standalone company formed in 1981. In the 1990s, Taylor Dunn, under its then ownership, which was a group prior to Polaris, acquired the Tiger business. And over time, for reasons that aren't clear to me, Tiger really became buried, for lack of a better word, within a very large Taylor Dunn portfolio. Taylor Dunn, we just celebrated our 75th anniversary of Taylor Dunn, so it had been around since 1949, when in the 90s Taylor was bolted onto it, and so it had a very strong reputation, had a prolific portfolio of vehicles, very well known for customs, and so by the time Polaris acquired Taylor Dunn and then Waev, Tiger was a couple models in the Taylor Dunn portfolio, and really had gotten away from the core business of ground support, and was often bought for things like towing trams at resorts, or big heavy duty manufacturing and warehousing, towing, and things like that. And so we saw an opportunity, as we were moving toward the Waev venture, but even before that, the folks who were involved saw an opportunity to really do something new with Tiger. The Tiger brand was well known, even though it hadn't had a lot of traction in recent years. And we were working with the same partner who did the lithium ion batteries for GEM. The first project we worked on with them was a new Tiger power pack. And so sort of very much in concert with the Waev acquisition, we brought new Tiger tow tractors to market, and broke it out from underneath Taylor Dunn as its third brand. So since Waev had the business, we've had the three brands: GEM, Taylor Dunn, and Tiger. So that puts sort of the ground support heavy duty tow tractor under its own roof, and then that leaves Taylor Dunn with a robust, but not as large as it historically has been, a line of industrial electric steel bodied industrial vehicles that generally fall into the categories in the industry of burden carriers, tow tractors, small lighter duty tow tractors, and people movers of some sort. And so those vehicles were created to serve, the industrial markets of manufacturing, warehousing, distribution, airports to some extent, train stations and the like. But really, given their versatility, they've expanded into a multitude of markets. And we like to say that Taylor Dunn is serves A to Z, airports to zoos and everything in between, because they're used all over the place: convention centers, college campuses, prisons, nurseries, like I said, zoos, airports, you name it, because they're so durable and so versatile. They're used all over the place, and so that's probably our brand that has the farthest reach of any of them because they're not only from a sector standpoint, but from a geography standpoint because it's so well established.
Yeah, a lot of those applications again, tying into the podcast theme of automation and what have you, have that tend sound like they kind of have that geo fenced kind of application area, zoos and prisons and nurseries, where automation might benefit. It may not. The return on investment has to be evaluated, but also I think of automation when I don't when people hear autonomous they think fully autonomous vehicles, driverless or what have you, and to some extent that's the idea. But there's levels of automation, right, ranging from nothing to fully driverless, and then everything in between, which includes ADAS type functions, advanced driver assistance, where you have a human driver but still like forward collision avoidance and things like that. How is the is that kind of technology advancing in this sort of space with these utility vehicles, or is that still also is that further out there, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think there's certainly an opportunity for it for all the reasons that you said. And, as Wave, that's not our business. And it would take a lot for us to invest in that. But we have scratched the surface with our Tiger tow tractor. The lithium ion version of it has an anti-rollover technology integrated into it because safety again being paramount, and there have been some high profile incidents with the use of tow tractors where they were rolled and people were seriously injured, etc. So that's a use of technology that we've been able to incorporate, and only because of the electric motor and the battery and the motor controller and all the things that go into allowing that to take place. But that's scratching the surface. There's tons of value when it comes to ADAS and the like, because again, these are vehicles that by definition are being used for some work application, and worker safety is very important and is something that the customers and the employers generally are willing to invest in. So I think that there's probably a greater likelihood of adoption with our Taylor Dunn and Tiger type product than Gem for that reason.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, all of the things that you see in cars, like it can be done much more cost effectively in these platforms, like advanced or automatic emergency braking, or just forward collision avoidance, blind spot detection, lane keeping. These are all things that we have in cars today, um, and but because of the generally the slower speeds, the more controlled environments, you get away with lower cost sensors technology. I think that might might make it more more possible in the future. But yeah, it's I guess I wonder what some of the if there are regulatory or whatever hurdles with incorporating some of that. I just don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't see there being a regulatory hurdle to more traditional ADAS because the human element's maintained.
Yeah.
Like a lot of technology, and this better than anyone, there's eventually going to become a point where the costs come down to allow more widespread adoption. We're seeing that with batteries,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the type of technology we're talking about here eventually will get to that point, and then that's where we really be able to see what's possible and what fits a market need and the like. At this point, in our experience, it's a little bit too removed and too expensive to really get any traction, but I would think it's only a matter of time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean the parts wise, it's maybe a couple $1,000s worth of parts, maybe, retail. And then but and we learned this when we were working with auto manufacturers. We were buying like sensors for I guess we were buying radar sensors for automotive for like 5,000, and then we were working with an auto manufacturer like, oh, we get those for $250. So but yeah, some of the at least even at the low quantity level, a couple $1,000s worth of equipment, I think, provides basic ADAS, because we're doing it with some of these buses right now, larger buses. We are adding, because of the speeds, more expensive, sensors and equipment to those platforms, and there are other, there you got to look around a longer, periphery of a 40-foot bus than and things like that. But but yeah, the prices are coming down with all of these sensors. But at the speeds that we're talking about, there are even some like ISO safety certified sensors from groups like SICK. You may have heard of SICK. SICK is this is the founder's name. It's a German company that has a line of sensors that are very robust and industrial, um, but maybe aren't appealing to the consumer because of the last name. But no, it's a wonderful company. But yeah, interesting applications. I guess what what do you see? AI is a big deal. I mean, everywhere you turn, there's a new you know startup with LLM on their pitch deck, large language models, and but generative AI really is very powerful. We're doing some things to kind of generate new behaviors and maneuvers. There's so many things that can be done with it. What are your are you seeing any sort of traction or interest with AI and its role for fleet management and predictive maintenance, other things like that in your arena?
Just early days, really, and I'm not personally well versed, so this may be just an uninformed source, but you know, certainly a key to unlocking the benefit of AI when it comes to things like predictive maintenance and the like is connecting the vehicle in the first place. And so, again, something that's facilitated by the electrical architecture. We've partnered with a company named Joyride, which its primary business is supporting technology for shared micromobility fleets, scooters and bicycles and things like that. But we've been working with them for the past couple years about adapting its technology for integration in GEM on an aftermarket basis at this point. And they just recently announced that they've developed their own IoT for LSVs and small vehicles like GEM that then allow them to be internet connected and leverage the software side of it. So I share that to say that we're, again, early days, but beginning to make what are generally dumb vehicles smart and connecting them. And then that's really a prerequisite in my mind to be able to leverage some of these higher level tools to be able to really utilize technology to serve the end user, the fleet managers, and the operators in that way. The other way, non sort of vehicle way that we're using AI as a small company is that we have a tech service AI tool where we've loaded, you imagine 75 years of Taylor done manuals and wiring diagrams and user manuals and all that sort of thing, and you add the other brands on top of it. We've uploaded to a repository all of that content, and we've adapted an AI tool to be able to mine that information to answer basic and sometimes complex questions about parts, service, maintenance for our
Hmm.
vehicles. And we're early days. I think it's still in the beta testing, but it's a really powerful tool and particularly valuable for most of our customers and even dealers who aren't super familiar with our vehicles. One of our large industrial dealers may sell a bunch of Taylor Dunns, but their main business is forklifts. And so the techs don't tend to touch our vehicles in part because they're so reliable and maintenance free, but it's they don't always have the knowledge. And so to be able to quickly get answers without needing to talk to our tech service people or look through a bunch of manuals is pretty powerful. So we're encouraged by that use of AI.
Yeah, yeah. I remember that. What was it? The digital wrench? Was that the tool
Yes.
that
Yes.
that you all have? But yeah, the and then the yeah, obviously AI for maintenance and some of the kind of the telematics that you maybe speak of are great applications. I mean, there's so many things, so many angles, even in terms of how it may accelerate manufacturing, right? There was a company out there called Local Motors, which you may have heard of. That was that they're no longer around, but they were like 3D printing parts of the chassis and what have you, and now you just I see tools out there that are using generative AI to where you can generate parts that could be maybe 3D printed or laser cut or what have you with just you know minimal knowledge about how you would otherwise do that. It factors in the stress of materials, failure modes, effects analysis, and all this, and it's pretty amazing. I don't know what that's going to mean for the future of manufacturing, but it should lower the cost and it should make it more and more interesting. And I don't know if that's something that you all are looking at, but it's kind of a little bit further out there as well. But
Yeah, no, I think the design side of it is going to be greatly enhanced by AI if it's not already, just because the ability to design, test, retest, iterate
mhm.
is just so fast. And so, companies more sophisticated than us are probably already using that more robustly, but it's just going to be a matter of time where that becomes more mainstream and you're able to be a heck of a lot more efficient because of it.
Yeah, and simulation. By the way, we brought a gem model into one our the simulation tool that we used for autonomy, and now there's a new simulation tool that we're using that's a little called Carla, which is open source, a little more visually appealing. We were kind of stuck in the 1990s video games level of graphics a few years ago, and now we're kind of up to the 2010s. And but it's amazing what kind of realism you can get, and what you can, of course, achieve with simulation. Obviously, for us, it's for demonstrating the autonomy, but also just vehicle dynamics and modeling how these vehicles traverse and what kind of mileage they might get if you model that. Is amazing what could be done with some of these simulation tools as well. So, um, hey, I wanted to pivot because I know you have a little bit of background in motorcycles.
I do.
Am I right? Yeah. So you were well. Tell me a little bit about what you were doing and and yeah, I guess in the world of motorcycles and how that might relate to what you're doing today.
Yeah, so it's been a long and winding career for me, but I started out in power sports as an enthusiast as a kid. I rode dirt bikes and ATVs back in the day, and then, as many people do once they grow up, kind of got away from it. But I'm a lawyer by trade, and so the first 10 or so years I was in private practice of law, and I had the opportunity to handle a case for a client named the Motorcycle Safety Foundation. And that was my introduction to that client. Got a good result in the case, and sort of developed that relationship. And then it was kind of a perfect confluence of events. The partner who sort of had that client relationship was nearing retirement and sort of stepping back a bit, and I was sort of a young up and comer, and the client needed knew it needed some more legal advice than it was getting. It didn't have any in-house lawyers and whatnot, and so over the next few years I became more and more involved in that, or not only that organization, but it was one of four related organizations, trade associations associated with the power sports industry. And so I served that role, and it was really an education for me into the business of power sports. And eventually, I actually left the law firm to go in-house with those trade associations, and sort of what made it possible was that I became the in-house lawyer, and so they weren't paying my firm anymore. They could afford to hire me. But for me, what was really interesting was getting involved in the policy and the management side of the organizations, and getting deeper into the business of power sports. And so I ended up running the two four-wheel organizations, one dedicated to traditional ATVs, and then one dedicated to what then was a new industry, side-by-sides. So I was involved in advocacy, standards development, and all sorts of other issues related to that, functions that an industry association would provide to its members, which were the OEMs. And I had that role for 6 years, and then it was my exposure in those roles to Polaris that ended up having them ask me to come on board as their first VP of Global Government Relations, which brought me back to DC from California. And I had that role for a few years, did some other interesting things at Polaris, was actually tapped to start an entirely new business unit for Polaris, which eventually became known as Polaris Adventures, which was a network of third-party outfitters that use Polaris vehicles for tours and rentals, which was an amazing experience. And then the last part of my career, I was moved back into more of a traditional legal role, and was the chief counsel for most of the Polaris business units. And so motorcycles, boats, parts, garments, and accessories. The umbrella unit that had Gem and Taylor done actually was part of my portfolio. So, 20 plus years, I had various roles in the power sports industry. Early on, got back into riding. My wife and I took the motorcycle safety class together. We both got our licenses. And to this day, I have an Indian motorcycle in my garage.
Wow. Well, growing up in the, what was it, 70s and 80s, I watched Happy Days. I saw the Fonz. I really wanted a motorcycle, but my mom said, no, here's a skateboard. So I never got to partake as much as I wanted to. But thinking about, of course she, just being, and we'll talk about this too, a South Jersey mom was terrified of such machines. But like, I think about what could, some things that could be brought to, keeping with the theme of the podcast too, to make, operating such vehicles safer. Have you, thought about any of the, what kind of automation technologies might be brought to bear to for collision avoidance, blind spot detection, things like that maybe are brought to bear or could be brought to bear for increasing the safety of, motorcycle riding?
Yeah, 100%. And it's both sides of the coin, right? It's what can you do on the motorcycle, but equally as important is what are you doing to the cars and trucks.
Right.
And that's actually a source of concerned by the motorcycling community because a lot of this technology has weaknesses when it comes to detecting motorcycles versus full-size vehicles. And so refining that and improving it to have better detectability on the automobile and truck side is equally important, if not more so, so you don't have unintended consequences, or at least get the benefit of the technology that's already deployed. But on the bikes themselves, sure, I mean, there's been, it's not automation, but there's been a push over the years to mandate ABS for motorcycles, which actually has some downsides in certain applications, but generally is a good thing. The whole detectability of other vehicles. You know, one of the challenges of riding a motorcycle is, you know, you have the helmet on, and you know, visibility sometimes can be a challenge. You have mirrors, but depending on your riding position, they're not always as valuable as in an automobile. So you end up turning your head a lot to look and things like that. And if you had more sensors and things like you have even on cars already that could be applied to motorcycles, that would be a real value add. The helmet technology, there's lots of opportunities there with displays and other things, you know, cameras that can be deployed out the rear again for more visibility. So I think that there's, you know, many things that are already applicable to automobiles could be adapted. You know, the flip side is, you know, you're dealing with a different type of machine. The real estate's smaller, the configuration is different, the costs are lower in most cases, and so it's not as easy to implement some things. But again, I think as technology progresses and there's a recognition that these things are valuable, there'll be more adoption. And part of what aids that is that in many cases the motorcycle OEMs are car OEMs. You know, Honda's
Yeah.
probably the biggest manufacturer in the world, automobile, plane company, you know, it's a big technology company. You know, the other Japanese OEMs are involved in lots of different types of vehicles. The U.S. companies are a little bit more focused on you know, the motorcycle or power sports segment, but they're increasing their use of technology and by leaps and bounds. So I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity to adapt technology onto motorcycles for safety.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, just a little tidbit here is back in, I want to say like 2010 or something, so it was a while ago, I think. Yeah, about then, 2010. We were working with an application where we had lidar sensors on gantries, right, with Pennsylvania Turnpike and what have you. And so it's not the resolution of the lidar that we use today. They're much more resolute, but we we noticed, we would, you'd see trucks and cars come through these gantries, and we would get these perfect three-dimensional pictures of them. Motorcycles would come through, we would get good profiles of them, but in the rain, it was almost as if the rider and the vehicle disappeared, but you could see the trail of mist of rain coming up from behind the motorcycle, right? So we would pick that up and we would say that must be a motorcycle
Hmm.
because there's this rabbit trail, we called it rabbit tail, kind of following along. And so yeah, I mean, certainly lidar today is much more crisp, and anything on a vehicle would you could see the shape of the nose of the rider, probably. Well, I'm exaggerating, but it's certainly a technology. Yeah, some of the technology on vehicles should be able to enhance the safety. Certainly on trucks, buses, and things like that. Um, these sensors can see things that we can't see as humans sitting in the front seat with our two eyes facing in one direction. So definitely will provide safety for motorcycle riders if as this technology is adapted um, for collision avoidance on larger vehicles and just all vehicles. But I gotta imagine, yeah, it's got to be hard to do like AEB on a motorcycle because you've got two wheels and you can't just
Yes,
stop the motorcycle. You got to gracefully slow down maybe and let the rider take control.
exactly.
Um,
Yeah, there's
yeah.
definitely complicating factors with a two-wheel versus a four-wheel vehicle, that's inherently unstable. But there's certainly opportunity to deploy some of that.
And are three-wheel vehicles, I think I've learned that three-wheel vehicles are classified, is it true that they're kind of classified as motorcycles in terms of the laws or?
Yeah, that's right. Motorcycles under federal and state law are two or three-wheel vehicles. One of
Okay.
the projects that I did when I was at Polaris was actually to create at the state level a new classification, a subclass of motorcycle called autocycle, because when I joined, shortly after I joined, Polaris brought a new product to market called the Slingshot, which is a
Oh
three-wheel
yeah.
vehicle, but more of an automotive style platform, but yet nonetheless with three wheels, two in the front, one in the rear. And they say, challenges are sometimes lead to opportunity. Well, what we found was that although the vehicle was designed and intended to be a motorcycle at the state level, there were 7 states that had a tweak to their definition that disqualified that type of form factor from qualifying as a motorcycle. So there were 7 markets where we couldn't even sell the vehicle when it was launched. And so, as the GR guy, my job was to try to fix that. And what we ended up doing was adapting, not adapting, adopting, eventually in the 50 states, a novel model approach from AMVA, the Motor Vehicle Administrators Association, for this auto cycle subclassification, which essentially provided for a new classification for these vehicles that are automotive like with the two wheels in the front, one in the rear, that cleared the way not only to have allow them to be operated in the states where they couldn't, but really facilitated the adoption of these types of vehicles where they were already allowed, because you could operate them with a automobile license rather than a motorcycle, which made perfect sense because they essentially function like an automobile. So that was a situation where there was wide open space within the sort of contours of the federal law, but when it was applied at the state law, there were some nuances that had to be overcome. But it led to a better regulatory environment, not only for Polaris but for other OEMs as well, because it made it easier for customers to get behind the wheel.
Gotcha. Interesting. 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 Well, I know I mentioned South Jersey, and we found that we're both kind of from the same. We grew up in the same area, and
Right?
hopefully there's and probably we went to high school around the same time. So hopefully there's no. I was not on a football team or anything, so there's no high
Me
school
either.
rivalry here. but but it was a shore town, beautiful resort area in some regards, and
Yes.
um, and I think I just saw that speaking of autonomy and applications, that the Atlantic City airport had a demonstration of some sort of I guess some sort of automated vehicle on the tarmac there
Oh,
doing
really?
something. I have to find out more about it, but I was like, I should have been, we should have been doing that. That's my hometown. That's our
Exactly.
hometown. And it was like the FAA was involved, and I used to work at the FAA Tech Center. I was an intern at the FAA Tech Center in Atlantic City.
Right
Um,
there.
Years and years ago, I fixed all the computers for a summer in throughout the tech center in 1980. I don't know, 7 maybe. I don't remember. But
Well,
anyway, it was yeah.
dating ourselves, I can say that one of the reasons why I did ride motorcycles and ATVs is where I lived, which is very close to where that airport's located in Egg Harbor Township. When we first moved there, it was nothing but farms, and so it was actually a rural area, relatively close to the more suburban areas where you grew up, and then the shore towns themselves. And so back then, things like motorcycles and ATVs fit in there because, there were paths and power lines and things like that you could ride
Yeah.
along. But that's changed quite a bit over the many years.
I didn't get to ride uh, dirt bikes because my mom wouldn't let me. But I had a skateboard and I nearly cracked my head open on that. And I surfed until I watched Jaws one too many times. So I just used my Commodore 64 and learned how to program. So that's my story.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, no fun. It's definitely it was beautiful to grow up in South Jersey. I think nice area, but so just to kind of like think about some futuristic things before we kind of close out. Thinking about scalability of automation and like challenges and global rollout regulations. I mean, what do you see as sort of from a manufacturer's perspective? Um, what do you see as? And we talked about some of it, but just big picture, some of the major challenges with integrating automation into these different types of vehicle platforms, both just internally, cost wise, or just externally, with regulations and globally, thinking globally as well.
Sure. So there's obviously myriad challenges when you're talking about full-size vehicles operating on public roads that are pretty well known or slowly being overcome or at least attempted to be overcome. But from our narrow perspective, as a small, low-speed vehicle manufacturer, I think the most obvious challenge is getting the interests and investment aligned in a way to prove out the use case. And we talked earlier about some obvious use cases that should make sense. But at the end of the day, someone needs to invest to make that happen, not only in implementing the technology, hardware and software, but then purchasing the product. Because at the end of the day, we're all product and service providers, and we need a market to be able to sell into. And so I see an opportunity, and we've talked about this some recently, to put together a group where you have an end user who's interested in making this happen at some scale, and you have a vehicle OEM like ourselves and a technology provider like yourselves to really collaborate to not only prove that this will work the way we think it will, but to do it at a scale that accomplishes a few things. One, by achieving that, you're streamlining what it takes to take a vehicle from a non-automated state to an automated state. By leveraging some of these technologies you mentioned earlier that are coming down in cost, you get the overall price down. And you also use that, a deployment like that, as a proof of concept beyond what we can do in like an Albemarle pilot or university test case or something like that. You have dozens of vehicles operating in a very public way. That's just going to increase the awareness that this is possible, and hopefully prove the safety and efficacy of what we're talking about, which then will accelerate the ability to adopt it elsewhere and at more scale. But it's a long way of saying I think we really need to come up with a significant project that will allow these things to come together so that we can truly demonstrate its viability.
Yeah, no, 100%. So just kind of, yeah, last kind of question, dovetailing on those lines, just sort of projecting forward into the future, 10 years from now, where do you see um, like autonomy and automation as it, and some of the AI technologies as it permeates and gets sort of integrated into, sort of this multi-brand fleet of vehicles that Waev manufactures and sells. Like where and just for vehicles like it, where do you see this this going? Do you think we're 10 years away, 20 years away from, 5 years from sort of mass adoption of full autonomy, or do you think there's always going to be sort of a mix of both, sort of indefinitely?
Looking in my crystal ball, I would say, 10 years from now, our business and our users, our customers' use of our vehicles will be dramatically different. I think there'll be extensive automation and quite a bit of autonomous operation for all the reasons we said. It's in many ways an easier application to deploy autonomy and automation than others. But I also think that they'll never, maybe not never, but I don't foresee within that 10-year window the elimination of human operators. I think there's any number of reasons why that would be the case. Personal preference, safety, regulation, non-standard use cases. All of those reasons why I don't see within that horizon the elimination of human operators, but I do think we'll be looking at a dramatically different use of our vehicles than we see today.
Absolutely. No. Well, people still ride horses. I live in horse country, and sometimes I think there's more horses than cars around here. But no, it's been a fascinating conversation, Paul. I really thank you for your time. And yeah, I've always loved the GEM product. I'm glad that Waev is sort of taking it into its into this next generation of just advances with air conditioning and all kinds of other things that make it such a cool platform to have. I love having the GEMs that we have and riding them around, driving them around, as well as being driven. So, and then your Taylor Dunn and Tiger brands as well is just fascinating to hear some of the, opportunities for, automation and some of the things that may be brought into these platforms in the future, and just to learn about their history and the applications is really cool. So appreciate your time and everything you've talked about here today, and all the stuff that you're doing over at Waev.
Well, thanks a lot for having me, Paul. I really enjoyed the conversation and look forward to working more together in the future.
I hope you enjoyed the show Driven with me, Paul Perrone, your host. Don't forget to check us out at driven.show on the web, and give us a thumbs up or subscribe here if you like the show. Thank you for listening in. See you soon.